right. So I think you'll have to, just allow, I guess, technically yourself to be recorded, but just stay with yourself without the video on. All right, well, good morning. My name is Valdine Bjornson, and I am very lucky because I work with the Indigenous Student Center, or Mi'kmaq at the University of Manitoba. And I'm going to provide, hopefully, like within 30 minutes, I'll be done, to keep it kind of tight. But it will be about how to approach course-specific readings. Now, I definitely get a lot of requests for this specific kind of information. So hopefully this will be general enough, but hopefully a little bit specific enough for all of you. I just actually finished with a student just before we did this, and before we're meeting here. And this is really what I was speaking to him about, which is, with any of your course readings, the first thing you have to think about is your purpose. So this is different than beach reading, right? When you go to the beach, you're just relaxing on your couch and you're just reading. You're going to read for a different purpose, right? If you're just relaxing with a book, you're just reading because you casually want to go through the book. You might take your time, you might put it down and then come back to it, and you're going to maybe slightly be distracted. But when you're doing course reading, like I usually say, don't pick up the book unless you specifically know why you're picking it up, or your article, or whatever, you have to read. It doesn't always have to be obviously a textbook, right? So are you reading it for an exam? Are you reading it to reflect on something or to write? Are you trying to prepare for class discussions? And if, there might be other purposes there, but that'll help you focus on what you have to do. Right. So when you're reading for exams and when you're reading for specifically for writing, they're really, really different. When you're reading for exams, obviously you're going to be much more targeted. You're not going to be really, doing a lot of deeper reading in terms of thinking about it and connecting things, but you're just going to be getting material from the text to perform for the exam and to memorize things, basically, right? So I'm going to try and touch on a few of these. This will probably be more focused on exam preparation. I do have other sessions more for writing, which is a little bit of a different strategy. So, but I guess this is just a reminder of, don't start reading until you know why. Okay. So if you're reading for writing, make sure you're doing something as you're reading. If you're reading for an exam, then make sure you're doing something to prepare for your exam. Okay. So I mean that a little bit, in a silly way, but I really recommend students not to read unless they know exactly why they're reading. Okay. All right. So again, like I said, we're going to focus mostly on exam prep and just kind of getting through material. So you might be the linear type of person, which that means you tend to take notes kind of like going down, right? And you like kind of, maybe letters and numbers to tell where the information, like the layers of the information, where it falls under what categories. You're using indenting to kind of show that kind of goes under that heading. And then there's the more visual kind of person. So we're going to kind of, separate our presentation according to these two things. I will try to push you and nudge you over to this more visual approach. I think, linear notes are cool and all that, but when you get into the pattern notes, you're a little bit more interpreting what you're reading rather than just writing it down and being a little bit tuned out. Now, you might tell me I'm totally tuned in when I do linear notes. And if you like linear notes, stay with it, right? But this is just to kind of explore, right? Okay. So if you're a linear notes person, then this will be familiar. So you're writing down based on headings and subheadings. As you go into the visual notes that we're going to talk about, it'll still follow that same formula of headings and subheadings, but it's really going to be a little bit more visually presented. So you might be the kind of person that really likes to write down these main topics, and then you're going to go into the headings, and then the little details, right? So this is usually, now if you have a good textbook, it's going to be probably in different color and different size, right? So you might have, I find that biology and certain basic human science, like health type courses, even psychology, those kinds of courses do tend to have nice textbooks. But the person I was speaking to just earlier said, oh my goodness, I have to read this whole entire book and there's no headings. And he actually said, there's really not even any chapter numbers. It's just, these things that they're basically telling me are going to be happening kind of in that chapter. So I said, okay, that's harder because you do have to hunt around. But typically, if I'm and I'm speaking general here to all of you, I'm not sure exactly what kind of textbooks you have, but let's assume that you have an idea of where the headings are in the subheadings. And like I said, sizing, bigger headings are usually the main headings, obviously, and then the smaller size letterings are the subheadings, okay? And then colors might help you too. So I usually recommend finding those headings and looking for all of the bold blue ones, let's say. And then, that those are the main topic points, right? And then the orange ones might be the subheadings. And then, you're going to start reading for those kind of points under the big topic, right? And under those, under the big topic, that's where kind of like the nuggets of gold are, right? So that's where the information will come up that you actually probably have to really understand. Sometimes what happens is you read a big bold heading and you're like, yeah, I know all about this, right? It's just, I know this information. So you might go to the next main topic, the next blue, let's say, heading, right? And you might go, okay, well, that one, that one is not really that known to me. So you might pick that one apart a little bit and spend a bit more time on that one. Okay. So you have to be a little bit strategic about how you're going to go about that. But certainly it's just like little details. You can see it's not like write an entire paragraph on the entire chapter, right? It's still going to be main points, right? If you have notes from slides, like a lot of you tell me that you have to read textbooks and then you also have to listen to lecture, and in those lectures you have notes from slides. So I know this is maybe completely, the olden times, but if you print up your slides as you're listening to the lectures, you can start writing hand notes. Now, I know that some of you are like, oh my goodness, there's no way I'm doing that because I am totally all about keyboarding. If you write things down by hand, it's far better for your memory. So I would highly recommend you print up these PowerPoint slides if you can in note form, right? And then as you're listening to the lectures, you can start adding your little notes. And you can, if you really needed to, coordinate this, right? You can coordinate this within your textbook if you have to combine your textbook reading and your PowerPoint slides and lecture notes. And how you would do that is you would probably reconfigure it. So you might listen to the lecture, right, and have your little notes. And then as you're going through your textbook, you're going to refer to your PowerPoint notes and just combine as you go along, right? So, main topic might have been about, I don't know, the sociological imagination, right? And so that's the same topic that was in your textbook. And so you're going to add a few little points that came up in your lecture in that linear note that you're keeping. Okay, so you can combine that, that would be the perfect world of combining your textbook reading with your lecture note taking, right? If it's in one location. Sometimes students end up putting notes all over the place, and then they have a source for the textbook, they have a source for the lecture, then they have another source for PowerPoints, and nothing is coordinated. That's like 3 sources of information that you have to put into your brain and try to retain. And it's far more difficult. So combining all those different pieces of information would be ideal. And some of you are thinking, oh my goodness, that's going to take me way too long. That's studying. When you reconfigure it and combine it, you're actually studying. There is no such thing as wasting time when you do that, right? Because you're actually, what you're doing is you're saving time for when you're preparing for the exam. So if you combined your lecture notes, PowerPoints, with your linear notes, if you're really into those linear type of notes, you don't have to waste your time when you actually get to crunch time and preparing for the exam, because it's all together, right? And so you just saved yourself hours and saved a lot of stress too. Okay. So I would highly recommend and again, that would also depend on if you have to combine them. Some professors say, just focus on the lecture and my notes in the PowerPoints, and the textbook is just to support you. So then you've got your answer. Focus on the slides. And in that case, again, I would recommend you write down things next to the PowerPoint so you don't have 2 sources of information, the handwritten notes and the PowerPoints. But, you know, be that as it may, you can, I guess, figure that out however you like. Okay, but you know, you have to kind of also decide on what the professor says about you know, how the exams would be weighted, let's say. Okay, so for textbooks, I kind of went through this, but this is another really down and dirty way to get through a textbook chapter. Okay, so you notice there's the word skim 3 times. So in other words, I'm actually asking you to skim the textbook 3 times. Skim it for headings, write down the headings. And I mean just write down the headings. Don't even read anything except writing down the headings, okay? And you're going to separate them maybe in 1 page at a time or whatever. Then you're going to skim again for bold words. And you're just going to write down the main important words that you can see that are bolded if you have a pretty textbook. Sometimes you won't, but let's say you do. Then you're going to skim again. Again, you're not reading it, you're skimming for any other information. So you got your headings, you got your list of the bold words, and you got other information, maybe things that are in a text box or graphic or table. Focusing on what? Everything that you know? No, focus on things that you don't know. Okay, so we don't want to see paragraphs, sentences, you know, big long explanations. You're just pulling out the basic information. And you, by the way, you've skimmed it 3 times at this point. You haven't read anything really. Okay, then that's when you start reading it, because you're going to read for a purpose. It's a strategy. You notice that you really have a bunch of bold words that you really had no idea under that particular heading, right? So you're going to go to that specific area of the chapter, that particular heading, because you have a whole bunch of words you didn't know. You're going to focus on that particular heading, right? You might find that everything has got a lot of bold words that you don't know, and that's totally, that would make sense, but you might have some strategy, right? You might be able to focus on certain parts of the chapter by doing that. Okay, so a lot of it to hear this is that really about strategizing for time and really focusing on unknown things, right? And, you know, if you're doing this for exam purposes, you know, you might make a Quizlet, and you can make a meeting with me about Quizlet, and I can go over that with you, or practice cards, AKA recipe cards, right? If you're into the physical cards, or making a visual map, which is what we're going to spend a bit of time on. Okay. All right, so there's a few strategies I'm going to just quickly go through that might be interesting to you. So, and it's similar to this in terms of skimming and going through and finding things that you're not sure of, right? So I'm not going to go over them too much. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a flavor of them, okay? So one is collaborative strategic reading. I'm just going to put you down there. Okay, so collaborative strategic reading is really, I mean, it actually is meant for a study group. So collaborative part about it is you read with people, but you can certainly do this on your own. So again, you're going to preview it. What does that mean? Skim. You're going to skim, you're going to review, you're going to think about it, you're going to kind of guess, what do you think? Then you're going to read it, and you're going to read like kind of what I had mentioned in the previous slide. Where am I not getting it? What doesn't make sense? What's difficult, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to, now this is more, you know, for, I would suggest is more for each section of a chapter. What's the most important idea? And then make a note of that, all right? So again, you're skimming, you're going through sections that don't make sense. You write down that vocabulary, those concepts that don't make sense. But in the end, though, you're still working through that section, or that maybe that entire, I would probably say section by section, maybe not the entire chapter. You're writing down what was the most important part of that section. Okay. And then afterwards, you might, if you feel like you don't have that source already, you might then come up with certain questions to ask yourself, right? And I know that sounds like way out there too, but guess what? If you are creating questions to ask yourself later on when you've totally forgotten everything, right? When you're moved on and it's sort of in your long-term memory, maybe gone a little bit rusty, you can really focus on those questions, right? That you've made, that you knew that you needed to know when you created that, you know, summary, basically that gist, right? You might also, though, I hope everyone knows that in your textbooks, a lot of time now we have these online textbooks access, right? And a lot of those textbooks have these ready to go. They have practice tests, just so you know. Okay, so the first thing before I start creating questions perhaps would be to look at my own access and what kinds of things go with my online access textbook. Okay, but again, same idea. Preview, check for things you don't understand, then summarize each section. That's a little bit different. And then create the questions that you want to have as sort of your practice questions when you go back I don't know, in a few weeks or a few months when you're actually reviewing it for an exam. This is just the whole idea in another nutshell, right? So before reading, what do I know? What are my predictions? What don't I know when I'm reading, right? And then you're going to give yourself some summary ideas. So what were the summary ideas in this entire section, this chapter? I would suggest each section, right? And then come up with some questions, right? So that's the collaborative strategic reading. And that's kind of what it would look like, right? So I already knew that ecosystems were in the environment. What I think I'll probably learn more about the rainforest, whatever, I don't know, right? And then you're going through each section, you're going through words that you didn't know, and then questions that you'll use for your review for the exam, right? In a few weeks or a few months. Cornell Notes, I guess for me, really, it's more like you're going to have written notes. They're going to be linear. So those people that like linear, notes are totally going to be into maybe this Cornell Notes variety. But what you're basically doing is trying to keep a physical space for your questions or your key terms. So it's a little bit of a visualizing. So, but you're going to make it really basic. So these are my notes as I'm reading through, and you're just keeping your notes however you normally do, but keep a spot where you can have questions, or you put key terms, or you link to other notes, right? You might say, well, in chapter 1, they talked about such and such, and now in chapter 3, they're relating it to this, whatever, right? So you're making connections or questions, things like that. So it's sort of more like a visual thinking, but a little bit more free. There's really no format. For me, I view those as a Cornell note for your variety. So this is an example of what you could do, right? So you're just keeping your notes. It could be on the lecture. It could be notes on PowerPoints. It could be notes on your textbook, but you're just really, as you're not as formulaic, I guess. You're going to just kind of keep your notes linearly, and then you're going to add little points here, right? And then, kind of connections to what you previously read, or maybe connections to the lecture. So it's just sort of like, this is the notes, and this is your thinking about the notes. But again, remember, if you're doing handwriting, it really does help with long-term memory. Okay, now SQ3R, a lot of times people come to me and they know this one, but survey is summary. So notice it's similar to the other two strategies where you're skimming. You're spending a lot of time on skimming. As you're reading through, you're going to ask questions, right? You're going to write, ask questions about various things, like, what is this about? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why are these, why are we reading this? Why is this important? Right. And then you're going to, so you're surveying it, you're going to ask questions first, and then you're going to read it, recite, and review. Again, very similar to the other strategies, but the idea is skim, survey, get yourself ready to think about it, which is the questioning part. And then you go ahead and answer those questions, right? So you're going to answer the questions that you had based on your survey. And then recite. So what are you reciting? You're reciting and asking you the questions and seeing if you can actually answer them, right? And then review, you can go over it again and look at the summaries and just make sure you understand everything. This is a good one too, and it's very similar, right? A lot of these really good reading strategies talk about survey, skim, get your brain ready for things that you don't know, and then go ahead and read it and start thinking about the big picture, the summary, things like that. Okay, so that's a really, I think, a very standard one. But now I'm going to push you a little bit with visual thinking. So, humans process information both visual and verbal, right? So the whole idea is we want to really think about how our brain organizes ideas. And our brain organizes ideas through networking. Like if you think of the word book, like they're saying, when you think of the word book, you're going to have a whole smattering of all kinds of things that come up when you think of the word book. You might love books. You might hate books. You might think of books in school. You might think of books, I don't know, when you're relaxing on your couch. So books, just that simple idea there brings up a whole other different, experience. So that's why the visual learning idea is really important. Now, the visual learning can also go into doodling. Now, all the things that whoever you told you that don't doodle on your page, if you're doodling for the purpose of trying to connect ideas, that's extremely important. Okay, and this is where this visual, kind of note taking comes from. So it's studied through neuroscientists. It's not just me saying this. This is like really documented in terms of how we hold information. And it's really great to get our working memory to hold ideas when we can see the networks towards our long-term memory, which is really essentially what we want to do when we're in university trying to get through material. Now, this visual organizing of ideas can be for note-taking, which is what I'm recommending, lecture support. It can be for writing purposes to organize ideas. It can be for pre-reading, which is what we're going to go into here, and then just to practice for memory. So you can basically, create a graphic organizer and then toss it aside and see if you can recreate it. And if you can recreate that graphic organizer or that visual, then you probably have a pretty good handle on whatever that is about. Okay, so it's not just for reading, right? For graphic organizers, as for any of the other strategies that I just showed you, the collaborative strategic reading, the SQ3R, or the Cornell Notes, don't get into full-on sentences. Who cares? Write down a couple of really important points for each, concept that you're really feeling like you need to write down. Using these visual notes, and you could use visual notes, but maybe not just simply a graphic organizer, and check out these different kinds, right? So in science, and I'm going to run through a few here. So now this is just more me showing you different things that might kind of be interesting to you. Certainly, point A, point B, point C, and you're in your topics. I don't know what things you're studying about, but certainly, hopefully you can apply this to certain things. So, how do A and C overlap? You're going to put your little points there. How do B and C overlap, etc. Right? And do all three of them have anything in common? That might be more relatable to science, right? Relationships, so concept one, concept two. This one's, I don't know, big, that one's small. This one's yellow, that's green. This one's heavy, that one's light. So again, anything though that you're really having a hard time remembering, of course, you might want to pull this out, right? To just help with your memory, to get it from short term to long term. Again, if you're talking about people or scientists or important, concepts, like you can relate this to anything. It could be, I don't know, like certain periods of time if you're doing history or a biology, different kinds of viruses. I have no idea, right? And you could write down different points. When were they discovered? What do they impact? What kind of diseases go with those particular kinds of viruses, and et cetera, et cetera. This is about scientists though, right? So you can make your own little categories and columns based on different things that you can interrelate. This could be more like a timeline. So perhaps, this could be good for writing. It could be obviously good for history, or if you have to remember certain stages in psychological understanding, certain discoveries in science, whatever, right? This is more for when you have this particular word that you're trying to remember. And so it could be more, and this is maybe where you might go, because a lot of you doing much more advanced than just one word at a time. You might have a concept, right? And then you might describe this concept in this little box here, and then have little characteristics, and then give examples, and how it relates to you, right? Everyday life. The analogy thing is so super powerful. Like, if you think, like, this is a silly one, but think of a garden hose relating in that to arteries. Like, maybe that doesn't relate that well, but the whole idea is something like everyday kind of basic thing, and then giving an example of that based on something is super abstract, maybe, right, in your world. Like, we might not be able to pick out like a vein and look at it, but to understand it in terms of a garden hose is a way for us to remember what that is, right? For example, that might be a silly one, but you get the idea. Okay, so again, cause and effect. So you had an event, I don't know, something catastrophic, like something that you're learning about in Indigenous studies. There's an event and it created all of this impact, right? And so you can kind of make a visual for that. This to me is much more powerful than linear notes, because I can see a bunch of ideas right away on this one thing. This entire thing could be written in maybe three pages of notes. But when you put it in one smattering right in front of me like that, I can probably talk for, I don't know, 15 minutes about this one particular event because you've laid it out so nicely for me. That's kind of the idea, is harnessing broad ideas in kind of a visually summarized, kind of tidy, but holding a lot of information, right? Again, various things. So this is a scientific phenomena, write your words that describe that phenomena, then a real life example, similar to the one before. History, again, similar, right? Because you got the different topics and you got a criteria, and you might have different lists of different, words or concepts or people or, points in time, and then you're going to differentiate them somehow. Okay, similar to the other one that I just showed you with the columns. This is an example of what that might be. This is in business. So number of firms. Okay, so you're looking at perfect competition, monopolistic competition, all these other ones. And then you're going to have different categories. So number of firms. So in this particular perfect competition, there's many firms, right? Types of products, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how that works with an example, right? And what I'm trying to show here is that it's not just basic information. From this literally would be probably pages and pages of explanation in a chapter. And that's what you're going for. If you have bulk 20 note pages that you have to go through to study as compared to one page, it summarizes it really well for you. That's what you want. Because then in your mind, visually, you got the smattering rather than just one in, one out. That's one idea on that page. Okay, now I got to go to the next page, right? So the whole idea is to make it efficient, but work alongside the way your brain can remember ideas. This might be full on complicated for your brain right now, but this is usually what I work with people on, this Bubblus site. It's free. Again, though, this could be for reading, it could be for writing. So typically what I say to students is when you're reading, create something that's a visual map of your reading. This is different than the linear note, right? Different than the collaborative strategic reading, although you can, use similar ideas, but you are going to read for the heading. And remember what we talked about at the beginning, the subheadings, like the blue headings. And then these are maybe the bold words or the orange headings, for example, right? So you're going to kind of add these bubbles as you go. Guess what? That could possibly, especially if you use Bubblus, that could possibly be on one page, possibly an entire chapter. That's why linear notes are not as efficient. Although, again, keep in mind, if you're doing this, this is really on the superficial side, right? You do have to understand what that idea is under that subtopic, under that, chapter name, right? So it's not like you can just know this just based on making this, but certainly this is your starting point. So if you make that for chapter 1, you toss it aside and you go, okay, I'm going to recreate it. If this whole entire arm here, you have no idea what that was, you totally forget it, it dropped out of your brain, then you need to review that section of the chapter because you don't recall it, you have no connection with it, your brain completely did not make a connection with it, and so you have to review that. Okay, so that's a good way to test yourself if you're picking up anything in the chapter, but do it as you're reading. Make sure you're being extremely double dipping here, right? Because you want to read it, but you want to create something to study as you're reading. Okay, this might be horrible, but this is actually this is what I looked at when I was doing my own studies, because I had to do all these. Look at these horrible words I had to use, like ontology, epistemology. I mean, what is that, right? So, and then I'm trying to create a visual for myself. So for me to look at this, I can explain what these, really very, I don't know, non-tangible words are just based on this, because I can see how they're interconnected. That's also a way to do really complex vocabulary in a way that's visual, right? Because you're adding all of these different things that are similar and different to something that's pretty abstract, right? And then, again, this is very basic, but, you start with a problem. What's the problem? This might be more for writing. So you might have a question. This is my question that I'm centering my writing about. And I have 2, or I guess 3 different ideas that I'm kind of playing with as I'm writing. And then you kind of settle on something that's your conclusion point, and then describe that a little bit more, and then just sort of have a summary, right? So this could be something that possibly is in more like general narrative kind of textbooks, or if you're trying to structure a written composition. But certainly I can go over that more detail, not today though. Right, and this is also probably something that you would do more in kind of general reading, right? Less for biology and psychology textbook, and more about, the student that I was working with earlier, he had to do a reflection and critique of a reading that gives more of a narrative reading. So he could have used this kind of framework, right? Where it's, when he's reading, he's going to kind of come up with a couple of different ideas about supporting evidence of his position and then opposing evidence, and kind of just add on as he's writing and reading. He's going to kind of keep track of all that and then come up with a conclusion in the reading, right? And then also when he's doing his writing. Okay, so this is a kind of a beautiful way to combine the reading and the writing. Again, timelines, I think I've shown you already, but it's just another idea of how you can do that in a very, very visually organized way. Again, main topics, subtopics, very similar to what we're talking about. This could be your chapter title. This could be, the purple, subheadings, and these could be the headings underneath there or the bold words again, right? Okay, and if you think it's just for, your I guess your social sciences, you can also do this for math. I don't know where everybody is at this, but some of you might be doing more, calculus math type of thing. You can certainly do this for math. And I put this in here not because I understand everything on here, but in terms of math concepts, but certainly a summary of all the different things that you might have for math, right? Could be one solution or one way to diagram the problem, and then the information that you need, and then the actual solution, right? So it's just different ways of thinking about math to sort of organize certain things for you, right? So I've mentioned Quizlet. Please make a meeting or set up a meeting with me. We can talk about a few of these, but certainly Quizlet is a way to remember, vocabulary. You can quickly find visuals that go with terms. This is called a word matrix. So you might have really complex vocabulary, but let's say you know the word, I don't know, like this is a really silly example, so it might not be earth shattering to you in this sense, but let's say you have the word intermittence, right? Well, what does intermittence mean? Well, I know what submit means. I know what transmit means. I understand it to be, send. So intermittence I can relate to now because it has that whole idea of sending, right? And so when you read some of these words, they seem like they're way out in left field. But if you can sort of start looking at words more about the base part of the meaning and relate it to other words that that could be also helpful. That's way, way down into the vocabulary though, right? We've really been talking about general reading, right? And another one, if you're looking for that kind of, understanding about words, if you're really having a hard time with holding on to words, you can also look at etymology online. That gives the history, and it gives the history of where that word came from and really the meaning background behind it. Okay. So that might be of interest, although a little bit of a rabbit hole, depending on what you have to do. So I had been trying to create book clubs, but I guess more like study groups or however you call it, based on like larger classes. So if you are interested in that, I'll try to connect you, and you can sort of proceed, and I can certainly be part of those regular meetings if you're interested. And otherwise, there are study groups around campus if you're looking. Like, I feel like almost now, because we're online, there's a lot more of this being offered. There was a student, I feel like it was with the math program, and they have a virtual drop-in now. It used to be that you had to go to their little, room there, and you had to kind of do your thing about physically going there. But now it just seems more accessible, and some things are better, maybe not everything, but in terms of online virtual support, there's tons and tons of people, and certainly faculties that are looking at this kind of drop in. So, there's tutors on campus, there's workshops through, obviously you're in workshop of mine, but they're with the Academic Learning Center. There's writing tutors, that are specifically for written material. And obviously I mentioned the academic learning tutors. So you can make specific appointments with people that are focusing on specific, courses, right? And their specific area. So you might need more of somebody to talk to about material and less about reading strategy, which sometimes is the case. And it makes sense. If you're that kind of person, I would reach out to the academic learning tutors, right? Because definitely they have the content expertise. Okay. And that's about it. So I'm just going to stop the share. And yeah, I guess I should hold myself there for a second. So if you want to contact me, my name is Valdine Bjornson at umanitoba.ca. And certainly I'm flexible with my hours, so would love to meet with anyone if you want to further up this conversation, or if anything piqued your interest about other things that I mentioned, I would love to meet you again. Okay, I'm just going to stop the recording. So